Chapter 41, Breeding Spiritual Birds. Purchasing drunken aphids. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Seeing the other party so arrogant, Chen Mo remained calm and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, my strength is low." You. Xiao Zhanghua was extremely angry. He didn't expect that a kid at the second level of qi refining would dare to offend him. Good, good, good. He said 3 good s in a row, and then said a cruel word, "I want to see how you can sell grain at the end of the year without my escort." After saying that, Xiao Zhanghua flicked his sleeves and turned around and ran away. He also has pride in face. This time, Xiao Zhanghua was rejected by Chen Mo in a straight face, and he couldn't let the other party take action, and due to the rules of the market, spiritual plant husbands were not allowed to fight or kill each other, so he could only give up. However, he hated Chen Mo to the extreme in his heart. At this moment, he was determined that even if the grain in his field was destroyed by insect plague, that kid would not have a good life at that time. Sell grain? Humph. Wait for death. Xiao Zhanghua sneered in his heart, and returned to the spiritual field without stopping, relying on a flame palm to eliminate the aphid swarm. The insect disaster on the first day was finally suppressed as the sky gradually darkened. The vast majority of the spiritual fields in the entire Guchenfang city were burnt out by the overwhelming insect swarm. At this moment, Xiao Zhanghua's land was charred. Of the 10 acres of spiritual fields, at least 3 or 4 acres could not harvest a grain of spiritual rice. The remaining acres of land were probably affected to some extent. In this way, even if the weather is good in the future, the spiritual rice in the field will probably only be enough to pay taxes. Looking at the scorched ground, Xiao Zhanghua was so angry that his teeth itched. People are like this: when you are rejected by someone you look down on, the hatred you feel is often much stronger than that of a stranger. At this moment, he didn't hate He Jiping for not coming, nor did he hate the insect plague. He only hated Chen Mo for disobeying his orders. He Jiping's spiritual field losses were much less than Xiao Zhanghua's. Only one of the 5 acres of spiritual fields was affected by the disaster. In the following year, the harvest would be about 80% to 90% of previous years. As for Lanling, almost one of the 3 acres of spiritual fields had been eaten up. Of course, if He Jiping hadn't taken action, I'm afraid that not even a little bit of spiritual rice seedlings would be saved. Taoist where did these insects come from? Lanling was still in shock, and at this moment she had already let the other party do whatever he wanted. He Jiping helped her a lot. Why did the other party help her? The purpose couldn't be clearer. After experiencing the insect plague, Lanling didn't dare to use shyness as a weapon to dangle the other party. She had to let the other party taste some sweetness, otherwise if this happened again, she would be the one who would suffer in the end. He Jiping kneaded it with one hand, feeling very happy in his heart. The 1 or 2% loss was also thrown behind his mind by the male stimulation. A small disaster every 3 years and a big disaster every 10 years. Everyone knows this sentence. Lingzifu with a little Ling Sha will learn a Zhengjiniitzi to prepare for the disaster. Where did the bug come from? He didn't know, but he learned this spell after hearing what other Lingzifu said. Unexpectedly, it was really used. Ah! It hurts. Lanling shrank back and said angrily, "Long-term Lingzifu know it?" Of course. But why would he? Lanling pointed in the direction of Chen Mo. She clearly remembered that the other party became a Lingzifu 2 months later than her. Why did Chen Mo know it, but she didn't? Him. He Jiping looked at the cabin in the distance, with a sneer of disdain on his face. He's a butt seller. The old woman was served well by him, so it's normal to reward him with a copy of Gung Jin Yi. At this point, he pressed his face against Lanling's and looked at her. The meaning conveyed in his eyes couldn't be clearer. As long as you serve me well, I will also give you a copy of Gung Jin Yi. Of course Lanling heard it, and at this time she had to follow the other party's meaning, but she was not a girl who didn't know the world. If you embark on the path of cultivation alone, you must have the courage to face it alone. He brother, ouch, be gentle. She said angrily, "The person is definitely yours, and I want to be formal for the first time." Oh. How formal? He Jiping was teased by this sentence. Pick a good day, and you and I will officially become Taoist partners, how about it? Okay. He Jiping was overjoyed, and kneaded his hands harder. As the sky gradually darkened, Chen Mo took some time to collect the bodies of the drunken aphids. These insects were all green, and if they did not have the perception of the gold spiritual root, they would be hidden in the spiritual rice seedlings and difficult to be found with the naked eye. At this moment, even he, whose Gingjin finger had already reached maturity, had to be careful in dealing with it, fearing that there would be a mistake in the spiritual rice in the spiritual field. Now that the drunken aphids have just become adults, it is still relatively simple to find or eliminate them. Once the spiritual rice ears are hanging and the drunken aphids enter the mature stage, it will not be so easy to eliminate them. Chen Mo looked at the pile of drunken aphid corpses, and fell into deep thought for a while. This thing cannot be eaten by cultivators, although there is a trace of spiritual energy in the spiritual insects. These are all alien spiritual energy. Once absorbed into the body of the cultivator, it will cause disorder in the Dantian spiritual energy, and the consequences will be even more unimaginable. But it is a pity to leave such a large number of drunken aphids. Chen Mo thought about it, and it seemed that there was only one way to make the best use of it. That's right. Raise 1 or 2 magical birds. Magic chickens or magical ducks are fine. These aphids are the best food for them. Of course, if nothing unexpected happens, a spiritual support officer will come to your door soon, and you can buy a lot of them with a little spiritual sand. According to Ling Jifu's internal price, these aphids' corpses of his are probably not even worth a tael of spiritual sand. A young chicken in Fang City costs about 5 taels of spiritual sand. After 3 years of maturity, it can grow 5 to 10 times. However, the chicken can only be fed with spiritual grain husks and spiritual worms. It will consume about 5 taels in 3 years. Raising soul bird seems like a surefire business, but there is an old saying that goes like this: a family with a lot of money and feathers is not counted. This also applies to spiritual birds. Once there is a disease or disaster, I am afraid that I will lose all my money. The people in Guchenfang City who can concurrently serve as Ling Jifu and Ling Yang officers are all large grain growers. Firstly, they have the strength and technology, and secondly, they are also confident. As for ordinary spiritual husbands, even those at the 3rd level of qi refining would not dare to easily step into the realm of spiritual nourishment officials. If I raise a spirit bird, will it unlock the career of a spirit keeper? Chen Mo secretly speculated. If this is the case, there should also be talent support. After thinking about it for a while, Chen Mo made up his mind to buy 2 spiritual chickens and raise them in the coming spring. With his current financial resources, he should be able to afford the compensation for 10 taels of spiritual sand. In this case, these aphids cannot be wasted. It is also a good choice to use them as snacks for spiritual birds after drying. But these are probably not enough to eat, so Chen Mo planned to take advantage of the insect plague to make purchases. Chapter 42 Scheming Woman. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chen Mo calculated that he still had less than 20 taels of spiritual sand in his hand. As far as he knew, there were about 100 people in Guchenfang City who also held the position of spiritual support officer. Their area of land was not in a good location and there was no spiritual pawn to accompany them. Most of the spiritual planters were just doing jobs. Doing the most basic business of farming. Therefore, he must hurry up and purchase all the aphids that were eliminated by Gung Jinji before the spiritual raising officials from other regions come to visit. Otherwise, once those people come, the price will be driven up. Chen Mo thought briefly and looked in the direction of He Jiping, seeing that the other party was still in his cabin and had not come out. He walked to Lan Ling's spiritual field. After the insect plague passed, the female cultivator at the 1st level of qi refining took care of the spiritual field and pulled out the weeds growing in the ground. Regarding Chen Mo's arrival, Lan Ling was unexpectedly secretly happy, and the expression on her face was complicated but also a bit charming. Fellow Daoist Chen, what brought you here? Chen Mo didn't want to talk nonsense to the other party, so he went straight to the point. How many aphid corpses do you have here? Seeing him asking this question, Lan Ling was stunned. Corpse? How many? How could she know? The insects that died under He Jiping's fingers are still lying in the ground. How about this, a tale of spiritual sand, and the aphid corpses in the ground belong to me. Ah! Can this thing still be sold for money? Lan Ling obviously didn't expect it. As a diligent spiritual planter, every day I only think about how fewer weeds will grow in the spiritual field, and more rice will hang on the ears of rice. Obviously no attention has been paid to other areas. Is that okay? Chen Mo didn't want to talk nonsense to the other party. Okay, okay. Lan Ling was delighted. This is a tale of spiritual sand. Selling a tale of spiritual sand for something you don't have is making a crazy amount of money. Chen Mo took it out and handed it to the other party's hand. Lan Ling, who was holding the spiritual sand in her hand, deliberately gave the other party a wink. She knew very well that in a few months at most, once the spiritual rice matured, she and He Jiping would officially become Taoist partners. By then, it would be difficult to rely on her beauty to grab some resources, so, now, Chen Mo turned a blind eye to the female cultivator's random charm. After paying for the spiritual sand, he took the basket and went directly to the ground. As soon as I got closer, my attention was instantly attracted by the densely packed corpses of aphids. That's right. Although the aphids in my spiritual field have also piled up into a small mountain, compared with this place, they are not even the slightest bit worse. Those insects or other spiritual fields flew in. Just like this, the number is so huge, not to mention the origin. Chen Mo picked up the bugs very quickly. He must rush to plunder all the aphids' corpses in the 3 acres of spiritual field before dark. Once it gets dark, the ugly evil spirits will come out again, so it's better to go back to the safety of the cabin. On the other side, Lan Ling stood on the field ridge looking at the man who became Lingji's husband 2 months later than her, feeling uncomfortable in her heart. The other party has been prospering in the past 2 years, and her? Soon, you will have to live under someone else's roof. Not fair. She was originally looking at Chen Mo with sadness in her heart, but she gradually realized that something was wrong. She tried to go down to the ground and pick up a few insect corpses, but she couldn't match her speed. The opponent's swift movements and crisp attacks were far beyond her imagination. Even after images are almost appearing. What's going on? Lan Ling murmured in her heart. She was at the first level of qi refining and naturally couldn't see through Chen Mo's true state. Now, in her heart, she still proudly believes that the other party's strength is only equal to hers, and she doesn't want to accept it for a while. Acknowledging the other person's excellence is inherently difficult. It got dark. Lan Ling did not warn her, but turned around and returned to her cabin. She was lying on the window, quietly watching Chen Mo's movements in the spiritual field, really hoping that he would be intoxicated with examining the aphids' corpses and forget about time. When the evil spirit comes and kills the opponent, all his resources will belong to you. However, her dream was soon shattered. In the sight, the figure of the other party disappeared after a few ups and downs. After a while, a faint fire lit up in the other party's cabin. Damn it! Lan Ling slammed the door, feeling extremely angry. After her thoughts drifted away, she subconsciously touched her face and said to herself with a flushed face, "With my beauty, am I afraid that I can't win over you?" Naturally, Chen Mo would not know that just by collecting the insects, he would be targeted by the female cultivator next door. He just poured the insect corpses on the ground and roasted them with the power of the flame palm to prevent the insect corpses from rotting and deteriorating due to damp weather. It took a whole night to dry several baskets of aphids. He weighed it and found that the dried insects alone weighed about 20 kilograms, which was quite a lot. Next year, if you raise spiritual chickens, you can save several taels of feed money. As soon as it got dark, Chen Mo sensed movement outside the door before he even went out. He, who wanted to make rain today, frowned slightly. He opened the door and looked at Lan Ling, who was a little shy 2 or 3 meters away. She pretended to be surprised, but before she could speak, the other party suddenly rushed towards him with tears streaming down her face. Chen Mo frowned and dodged easily. Lan Ling, who was stunned for a while, looked at him pitifully and opened her teeth slightly. "Chen. Fellow Taoist Chen, you have to help me." "Help you? What's the matter?" Chen Mo was a little disgusted. Considering what she and He Jiping did, he would be merciful if he didn't kill her. "Are you still thinking about cheating?" He Jiping forced me to follow him. Lan Ling stopped talking and leaned forward slightly, puffing up her proud chest. Chen Mo saw through the other party's trick at a glance. It was obvious that she wanted to use herself as a gunman to deal with He Jiping. If nothing else, after these days of hard work, He Jiping should almost win her. That's why Lan Ling took the initiative to find him at this time. Chen Mo sneered in his heart. It seems that Hua Lingsha's collection of insect corpses yesterday gave her the illusion that she was interested in her. But in this case, Chen Mo had a plan in mind, planned to take advantage of the situation. Him. Why should he? Seeing Chen Mo angry and furious, Lan Ling was overjoyed, but the surface is still that charming. She took the initiative to stick to it, blinked her tearful eyes, and whispered, yesterday, he used the opportunity to eliminate the insect plague to force me to submit. I. At this moment, Lan Ling was almost leaning on Chen Mo, her wrist gently resting on his waist. What's wrong with you? I can only promise him. Lan Ling raised her eyes and looked directly into Chen Mo's eyes, but, do you know? From the first time I saw you 2 years ago, I can't help myself. I have a plan. Chen Mo felt a chill. This kind of scheming woman is no better than Wenxiang Pavilion. At least the people there only care about your money. I never talk about feelings with you. Pretend to help He Jiping clean up the spiritual field and clean up all the corpses of aphids in the spiritual field and see what his reaction is. Chapter 43 Vicious Man. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lan Ling obviously didn't expect such a plan. She looked into Chen Mo's eyes, and for a moment she thought that the other party's real purpose was the drunk aphids in the field. In a flash, she realized it. That's right, the other party's purpose was the drunk aphids. Obviously, this was a test for herself. Only if she brought him insects, he would believe what she just said. At this time, Chen Mo patted her on the back gently said, go. Lan Ling slowly took a step back, bit her lip and looked at him, saying, okay. Don't worry, the spiritual sand will be given to you. The other party nodded vigorously, turned around and went straight to Ho Chi Ping's spiritual field. Chen Mo looked at her leaving back, raised the corner of his mouth, and stepped into his own spiritual field. He pinched his fingers, and clouds and rain gathered in the sky. With the rain spell coming down, this spell finally broke through the 200 mark. After yesterday's incident, he had basically fallen out with Xiao Zhanghua, and he would not go to the other party's spiritual field to make rain in the future. Therefore, it was almost impossible to practice this rain-making spell to a small success before the autumn harvest at the end of the year. However, Chen Mo was not in a hurry. With the qi transfer technique, his tolerance rate was obviously increased several times. Even if there was no harvest this year, he would not starve to death. On the other hand, it was unknown what Lan Ling said to He Jiping. At this moment, the two were intimately picking up the corpses of drunken aphids that they had killed yesterday in the fields. After watering, Chen Mo took out the futon and sat cross-legged, holding the low-grade spirit stone in his hand. He began to practice the qi nourishing technique. Now, with the spirit stone, his practice speed can be said to be nearly twice as fast. It is already April, and his qi nourishing technique has accumulated 105 experience points. At this speed, within about a month after the harvest, his realm will be able to break through the 3rd level of qi refining. 1 level a year. This speed is not slow even in Xian Peak, of course, even for disciples of Xian Peak, unless they are outstanding people like Li Shangxian and Siyu. Ordinary disciples in the early stage of qi refining are not qualified to use low-grade spirit stones to practice. At this moment, the spirit energy in this spirit stone has been consumed by more than half, and the luster is obviously no longer as good as before, but even so, it is not comparable to spirit sand. Chen Mo is very worried. If he can't afford to exchange the spirit stone next year after using it this year, can he go back? Near noon, after a busy day and a night of rest, Xiao Zhanghua walked out of the wooden house. He habitually went to the spirit field to practice, but what he saw was dry and cracked soil. In an instant, anger surged in his heart. Damn guy, that he forgot that he had completely fallen out with the lowly spirit plant husband named Chen yesterday. He even had the idea of killing him. But now, his 10 acres of spirit field, no, there are still 6 or 7 acres left. no one is watering it, although it is simple to take care of the spirit field, it is quite time-consuming. It takes at least more than an hour to water once. You know, in order to successfully break through the 4th level of Qi refining and become a disciple of Xian Peak within 2 years, Xiao Zhanghua is now racing against time and cannot waste too much time on rain. It is easy to go from frugality to luxury, but difficult to go from luxury to frugality. At this time, Xiao Zhanghua was obviously very uncomfortable with doing these things again. He struggled for a long time, and finally made up his mind and said to himself viciously, "Bow to a dead person, it's not bowing." After doing psychological preparation, Xiao Zhanghua quickly came to the spiritual field where Chen Mo was, but when he saw the other party's green spiritual rice seedlings without any signs of damage, he still secretly clenched his fists. In his heart, he was even more angry. And this small action was still captured by Chen Mo. He was also a little confused about the other party's visit again, until the other party spoke. "Fellow Daoist Chen, what happened yesterday was Zhao's fault. I was anxious at the time and spoke without restraint, please forgive me." As soon as these words came out, Chen Mo instantly understood the other party's intention. Yes, he still wanted him to make rain. But the anger that just flashed across his face meant that the other party was not sincere at all. At this moment, if it were a normal person's temper, he would naturally tease him, or sneer and mock him, but no matter what kind of behavior it was cool for Chen Mo, but it was not in line with the maximization of interests. Since the other party has turned from a real villain to a hypocrite, he will accompany him. "Senior Xiao, that's not right. I really couldn't spare my hands yesterday." I understand. Chen Mo slapped his forehead and said with some annoyance, "Oh. I forgot." After speaking, he stood up and rushed straight to the other party's spiritual field. Without the other party speaking, the rainmaking technique gained another 4 experience points. On the other side, Xiao Zhanghua, who was practicing, nodded contentedly, thinking that this boy was sensible and didn't let him waste his breath. It was obvious that he still wanted to please him. However, no matter how much he tried to please him in the future, it would not be possible to make up for the mistakes he had made. He had disobeyed him and made him bow his head on his own initiative. So, Chen Mo was doomed to die. When he returned to the spiritual field, Lan Ling came. She pushed a small cart full of the bodies of drunk aphids. Chen Mo glanced at it and thought that it would be about 30 kilograms after drying. It was a lot. "Chen Daoyu, he agreed to be with me." Lan Ling pushed the cart to Chen Mo's door, fell down, and continued, "What should I do now?" Chen Mo took out a pound of spiritual sand and handed it over, and knocked him against the wall, saying, "In this case, the next step is to hang him as much as possible. Remember not to let him break through the last step." Where has Lan Ling ever seen such a scene? Being pressed against the wall, saying such tough words. She nodded subconsciously, and for a moment she couldn't tell whether the other party was true or false, and at this moment, a figure slowly approached. Feeling something unusual, He Jiping still followed, and happened to see this scene of Chen Mo knocking Lan Ling against the wall. Perhaps, this was originally done by Chen Mo on purpose for him to see. A son and a dog, watch them bite each other. You. He Dao, brother he, it's not what you think. Lan Ling was a little panicked. She didn't expect the other party to do such a thing. Now she didn't know how to deal with it for a while. Instantly, her survival instinct made her think of a way. It's him. Yes, it's him. He tricked me into sending the aphid corpses over here, and he also gave me 1 or 2 liang of spiritual sand. After saying that, Lan Ling cut off her arm to survive, and directly sent the spiritual sand that had just been received and not yet warmed up to He Jiping. Lan Ling didn't understand. How could He Jiping not understand? The reason why he didn't say it was because he was afraid that the other party would take the insect corpses. 1 or 2 liang. You want to buy so much for 1 or 2 liang? He Jiping instantly understood that it was not Lan Ling who betrayed him, but that she was used by the other party. Pa! He snorted coldly and threw the spiritual sand over, and was about to load the pile of insect corpses that had just been unloaded. Stop! Chen Mo's face was gloomy. The transaction has been reached. How can you regret it just because you say so? This is my Pa! The next second, a fire palm that was no weaker than Wang Lixia's instantly slapped He Jiping's left chest. Newcomer, finally recommended. Please read and recommend the monthly ticket. Thank you. Chapter 44 The Real Insect Plague is Coming. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This palm was so powerful and so fast that He Jiping didn't have time to react. He tried to dodge in a hurry, but he only moved half a step away with his strength. In an instant, the flames with heat waves hit He Jiping's left arm firmly. The next moment, he flew backwards without any time to counterattack. The raging fire burned his clothes and burned his arms until He Jiping endured the pain and extinguished the flames, which made him feel better. Throughout the whole process, Chen Mo did not pursue the victory, but looked at the other party coldly. The instigator of the whole thing was now pale. After becoming a cultivator for so long, this was the first time she had really seen someone fight, and all this was beyond her expectations. Lan Lingxiu opened her mouth slightly, slowly turned her head in surprise, looked at Chen Mo with a cold face, and thought a lot for a while. Why is he so strong? Did I find the wrong target? The pain did not make He Jiping on the ground lose his mind. He knew very well that the palm strike just now was definitely deflected by the opponent. If it was aimed at his face or chest, he would definitely die. Didn't he just break through the second level of qi refining? He Jiping was puzzled. Why don't you get out of here? Chen Mo said coldly, do you really think I don't know about your little tricks? As soon as these words came out, He Jiping and Lan Ling's faces changed drastically. The latter rushed over and hurriedly helped up the grinning He Jiping, and then the two of them fled without saying a word. They never thought that releasing drunken aphids into the opponent's spiritual field would be exposed. In other words, the opponent knew about it a long time ago, so there were all these things now. He Jiping never dared to bring up the matter of the insect corpse again. He couldn't beat them, and he was in the wrong. Chen Mo kept his hands behind his back until he saw the two people walk away, and then he dispersed the golden light on his fingertips. With his current strength, although he and He Jiping are both at the second level of qi refining, if they want to kill him, they will not let the other party escape at all. However, killing is strictly prohibited between spiritual plant husbands. Chen Mo also does not want to cause unnecessary trouble, but not being able to kill does not mean that you cannot fight. The reason why he would rather expose his strength and attack He Jiping is to avoid unnecessary trouble in the future. He also has to concentrate on practicing, but he has no time to waste time with these cats and dogs. After drinking the two away, Chen Mo moved the pile of drunk aphids outside the door into the cabin and dried them into dried insects using the method of yesterday. After dehydration, the storage time of these insect corpses is greatly extended. As long as they are not exposed to water and rot, it is not a problem to store them for 3 to 5 years. 2 taels of spiritual sand for 50 kilograms of feed. Chen Mo didn't know if it was a loss or not. It was not until the next day when the spiritual raising officer next door came to the door and prepared to buy 5 taels of spiritual sand that he realized that he had made a profit. And a lot of money. The spiritual raising officer came to the door, and Chen Mo would not let him leave easily. At the cost of a bowl of spiritual rice porridge, he learned from the other party some matters about raising spiritual birds. First of all, whether it is spiritual chickens or spiritual ducks, they almost eat the husks of spiritual yellow rice, commonly known as bran. As for insects, these are foods that promote the rapid growth of spiritual birds, and they are generally fed every few days. Even the corpses of drunken aphids are much more expensive than the price of spiritual rice. If the spiritual birds are allowed to eat freely, they can't afford it at all. In addition, raising spiritual birds is not as profitable as outsiders imagine. Once they mature, Xian Peak will send people to purchase these spiritual birds at a very low price. Apart from the money for buying young birds, they can only earn enough to feed them. The value of a bowl of spiritual rice porridge is limited. The spiritual raising officer who came to collect insects did not tell Chen Mo that once these spiritual birds reproduce, it will almost become a sure-win business. They don't want another group of spiritual plant husbands to compete with them for business. After sending away 2 or 3 waves of spiritual cultivation officers who collected insects, Chen Mo continued to practice hard every day as usual. This kind of day and night meditation and rainmaking and practice, if it were an ordinary person, it might not be possible to persist, otherwise, He Jiping would not have thought of Lan Ling. After all, it is too torturous to be alone and repeat the same thing every day, and having a Taoist partner who applauds love at any time. The situation is very different. These days, He Jiping still focuses on recuperation. Lan Ling occasionally sneaks into Chen Mo's field, trying to release her charm and try to attract his attention. However, no matter what she does, even if she tries her best, the other party will not look at her. In this way, another half a month passed. I thought everything had returned to the calm time, and waiting for them was another year of good weather and good harvests, but something unexpected happened again. On this day, Chen Mo sat cross-legged and breathed as usual. Suddenly, a terrifying noise came from afar, and then the sky was dark, completely blocking the view. In the spiritual field, the spiritual rice had just sprouted. Although they had experienced an insect disaster, the growth of each plant was very gratifying. But this time, almost all the spiritual plant husbands, including Xiao Zhanghua, looked ashen and even felt despair. That's right, the overwhelming and dark cloud was nothing else but densely packed aphids. They flapped their wings from the distant spiritual field and landed in the next spiritual field. In less than an hour, the spiritual field that was originally full of plants was left with only a handful of yellow soil and some scattered broken leaves. Both Xiao Zhanghua and He Jiping were now slumped on the ground. Lan Ling looked at the slowly approaching dark clouds and felt her heart stop. Insect plague. This is the real insect plague. A small disaster every 3 years, a big disaster every 10 years. Just a few days ago, these spiritual plant husbands thought that the so-called insect plague was just like this, but did they not expect that it was an insect plague before? It was just an ordinary episode. Before the aphids reach maturity, they have almost no destructive power. Now, the spiritual insects that have entered the mature stage will not flee in all directions because of the expulsion of the spiritual plant husbands. They will only lie dormant on the spiritual rice seedlings in groups until they have eaten up all the edible things in the field, and then they will take off to the next place. How could Lingzifu save those pitiful crops from such a huge aphid? Perhaps they even had some difficulty protecting themselves from these insects. The insect disaster in the sky fell into Lingzifu's field not far away. With the bleeding in the other party's heart, all the efforts of the past year were completely in vain. Lan Ling stumbled to He Jiping in a panic, but this time, the real insect disaster came. Who could protect themselves? Chapter 45. Please, save me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The aphids that covered the sky were like army ants, rising and falling again after gnawing at a spiritual field, but this time, they came for Xiao Zhanghua's 10 acres of spiritual land. On the horizon, the light of the scorching sun is blocked. Occasionally, a few beams of light shine down, making shadows blurry and flickering. Xiao Zhanghua's face was gloomy. This year he had just acquired Wang Lixia's 5 acres of spiritual land, and today he encountered a once-in-10-year insect plague. This was really unspeakable luck for Ling Jifu. The more spiritual fields he contracts, the higher his harvest will be, regardless of food payments and rent, but so are the risks. When Xiao Zhanghua had 5 acres of spiritual rice, he lost 1,000 caddies of spiritual rice. Now 10 acres has doubled. A year's hard work has been in vain, and there are no training resources in the coming year. How can he break through the 4th level of qi refining and successfully become the disciple of Xianfeng? Only in this way can we successfully get rid of the lowly status of Ling Jifu. Seeing the swarms of aphids arriving, Xiao Zhanghua remained as still as a mountain. He stood at the head of the field like a statue, waving his flaming palm at the swarms of insects flying in the sky. However, in the face of natural disasters, manpower is limited. When his flaming palm struck the aphid, only a few sparks appeared, and then it was completely extinguished. Occasionally, some were directly hit, died suddenly and fell to the ground, but this number was nothing compared to the swarm of insects in the sky. The swarm of insects avoided where Xiao Zhanghua was standing and landed in the 10 acres of spiritual field behind him. The monk who entered Taoism through martial arts fell into a trance for a while. He turned around, and millions of aphids behind him were gnawing at all his assets, and also at his bleeding heart. But, what else can be done? Xiao Zhanghua gritted his teeth and stopped struggling pointlessly until his lips were bitten with blood, until the insects gnawed away all his crops. there is none left, completely gone. Year of hard work was completely in vain after this insect disaster, Ling Jihu. What a ridiculous identity. Xiao Zhanghua lowered his head, clenched his fists with both hands, and silently walked back to his cabin. Swarms of insects flap their wings and fly high. This time, we went straight to the spiritual fields of Chen Mo and He Jiping. At this moment, Chen Mo was extremely calm. At the moment when Xiao Zhanghua was fighting against the insect swarm, he had already made a plan: give up. Yes, he must give up something in order to gain something. With his current strength, even with Gung Jin's finger, he would not be able to protect 5 acres of spiritual land. Therefore, Chen Mo's goal is very clear: 2 acres. Even if it was only 2 acres, he would do his best to protect it. He stood in the 2 spiritual fields closest to the wooden house and the most fertile land. Facing the infestation of insects, his hands were instantly covered with a layer of light gold. When aphids arrive, golden light lights up the night. Wherever Gung Jin pointed his finger, swarms of insects fell to the ground. The originally dark sky was suddenly torn open by Chen Mo. On the other side, He Jiping had too much time to think about himself. He, who also knew how to use a golden finger, was also struggling to protect a piece of spiritual rice from the insect's mouth. However, he is only in the proficiency stage of Gung Jiniji, and he is still capable of fighting against the aphids in the adult stage. Can he deal with the mature stage? That's like scratching an itch. Finally, after resisting for a moment, he gave up. He Jiping sat dejectedly in the spiritual field, and the light came over. He looked in the direction of the light and saw a majestic figure stretched infinitely. Countless aphids' corpses fell like a heavy rain, and behind that figure, the spiritual field was saved. Chen Mo. His golden finger. He Jiping put his hands on the insect and stood up with his pupils trembling. He looked at everything in front of him in disbelief, unable to believe or accept that the opponent's Gingjin finger was so powerful. Back then, if he had attacked him in this way, he would have been penetrated in an instant, and he would not have been able to leave at all. Why is he so strong? In front of He Jiping, Chen Mo was like a god descending from heaven, with streaks of golden light shooting out from his fingertips. A large number of aphids died with each blow, but he is the only one who knows the real difficulties here. With all his strength, the spiritual energy in Chen Mo's body was consumed like a deflated rubber ball. As a last resort, he took advantage of every opportunity and held a mouthful of spiritual sand in his mouth. While using the Gingjin finger, he ran the qi-nourishing technique to replenish the consumed spiritual energy. However, this is a drop in the bucket. Time passes little by little. He Jiping seemed to have forgotten that his spiritual field was completely deserted. He looked at Chen Mo with extremely complicated emotions. On the other side, Lan Ling, whose face was ashen after witnessing the power of the insect plague, seemed to have grasped a life-saving straw for a moment and saw hope. That's right. As long as Chen Mo is willing to take action, her spiritual field will be saved. He will agree. Doesn't he want to become a Taoist companion with me? Agree, I agree. Lan Ling muttered to herself, and an abnormal blush appeared on her face. The insect plague is still spreading. After He Jiping's spiritual field was eaten away, the aphid swarm took off again and headed straight for Lan Ling's spiritual field. At this time, exhausted Chen Mo lay directly on the ground. Just when he was lying down, a smile finally appeared on his lips. Done. Although it was not much, it was still saved. Just when he was about to take a good rest, a figure rushed over. He jumped on him without saying a word. Chen Mo frowned and kicked the man away. He heard a ouch, and soon, the other party came over again. Help me. Get out. Chen Mo snorted coldly. He couldn't do this kind of limit-challenging thing a second time. However, Lan Ling was relentless. After all, this was her last hope. I promise to be your Taoist partner. Help me save the spiritual rice. Sorry, my strength is limited. Chen Mo didn't want to pay attention to the other party at all. No. You must help me. Please, I'm willing to do anything. Lan Ling turned her head to look at her spiritual field, watching the spiritual rice being eaten bit by bit, tears in her eyes. She used both hands to tear off her shirt and said, "Give it to you, I'll give it to you now, and it will be yours in the future. You can do anything for me. Don't you want me to be your Taoist partner?" I'll give you my body. There was a cry in her tone. She didn't want to be sold into the black mine because she couldn't pay the grain and rent. She had heard that it was a desperate situation for cultivators and even a hell for female cultivators. She didn't want to go, she didn't want to go. Take me, take me. Please, please. Chen Mo glanced at the other person, and faced with the delicate skin and upright breasts, he was not moved at all. He went to Wenxiang Pavilion and slept with Yushi, but he would never put himself in danger for a woman. He slowly got up, ignored Lan Ling who was taking off her clothes while crying, and walked towards the empty spiritual field with his hands behind his back. Please, please. Chapter 46 The Origin of the Insect Plague. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Where the insect plague passed, no grass grew. Lan Ling fell to the ground, watching the insect swarm devouring the spiritual rice she had worked hard for a year, and finally the sky collapsed. Her world was almost destroyed at this moment, but the insect swarm continued to destroy from south to north. When the aphid swarm took off again, Lan Ling knew that it was over. Everything was over. She staggered to her feet, and regardless of her half-covered clothes, she slowly walked towards her cabin. This scene seemed familiar. It seemed that this was the final destination of the spiritual plant husband. On the other side, Chen Mo watched the insect swarm go away, and then he breathed a sigh of relief. He held the spiritual sand in one hand, restoring the spiritual energy in his body, and inspected his spiritual field. For the occasional few fish that slipped through the net, he would send a Gengjin finger to prevent the insect plague from becoming a trend again. 5 acres of spiritual field. In the end only less than 2 acres were saved. According to the calculation of 300 jin of spiritual rice per mu, this amount of food is probably just enough to pay taxes and rent. It's better than nothing. He has also tried his best. With his current strength, he can protect such a large spiritual field, which is completely beyond his expectation. Perhaps, without the mysterious seeds bought from the 5 tails of spiritual sand, Chen Mo would not be here today. It seems that there is a destiny in the dark. After counting the losses, he picked up a sack from behind the cabin, and while performing the spirit snake body skills, he kept picking up the bodies of drunken aphids that fell all over the ground. These insect corpses were either beheaded or pierced, dead or alive, but the bodies were still intact. Chen Mo's 5 mu of spiritual field was densely packed with insect corpses, and the sacks were growing at a speed visible to the naked eye. It took nearly 2 hours until it was dark, and the field was finally cleaned up. The mature aphids are larger and have harder shells, which are more nutritious for spiritual birds. But it is not as easy and convenient to digest as the adult stage. The 2 forms of insects have their own advantages. Chen Mo poured the harvest of 3 sacks on the floor and spent a whole night drying them. In the end, he got more than 120 kilograms of insect corpses. The huge number was beyond his imagination. If these were sold to the spiritual breeding officers, 120 kilograms of insects would be equivalent to the price of 120 kilograms of spiritual rice. It was a considerable income. However, Chen Mo would not sell them. These were all left for him to feed spiritual birds next year. For other spiritual breeding officers, the arrival of the insect plague made them mixed. The good news was that they harvested a large amount of dried insects and no longer needed to purchase them in the next 2 or 3 years. The worry was that all the spiritual rice in the field was gone. Occasionally, there were powerful spiritual breeding officers, but they did not protect too much. The insect plague on the horizon lasted for several days. The entire Xian Peak was shrouded in a solemn atmosphere. The spiritual plant husbands were heartbroken, but they could do nothing until the aphids that covered the sky and the sun flew from north to south, across the spiritual fields and through the market. The nourishment of spiritual rice made these insects grow stronger. Its strength and shell became stronger, and its number increased exponentially. They headed south all the way to the foot of Xian Peak. The swarm of insects that covered the sky and the sun flew into the jungle and the mountains, and suddenly a strong attraction tore the huge swarm of insects apart. They were squeezed and pulled, and became smaller and fewer at a speed visible to the naked eye. A figure appeared on the horizon. She was wearing a red gown and her shoulder-length hair was scattered in the dust. She had delicate features and a beautiful face, and her slender feet were barefoot on the flying sword. She held a purple gold treasure gourd in her hands, and the strong attraction came from it. The swarm of insects in the sky became smaller and fewer, and was finally completely swallowed by the gourd that was only the size of a palm. When the last drunk aphid disappeared, the Female cultivator put away the dispersing spell and tied the gourd around her waist. Just as she tapped her jade feet and prepared to step on the sword to leave, a figure in green suddenly came from the horizon. The female cultivator frowned slightly, unable to hide her stunning beauty. "Sister Bai, where are you going this time?" That the person who came also stepped on a flying sword, with sword-like eyebrows and star-like eyes, a nose like a gallbladder, and a head of black hair with slightly frosted temples. The strong wind blew on her face, and her hair fluttered, just like an immortal. "Masterly, this little thing also alarmed you?" Bai Jiro looked at the other party indifferently and said. "Little thing?" Li Chunfeng chuckled. "You have cleaned up the spiritual fields of the entire Xian Peak. Is this still a small matter? I remember that I should have notified you 2 years ago." Bai Jiro asked back, "Isn't the matter of the spiritual fields a small matter?" For Li Chunfeng, the master of Xian Peak, spiritual rice is indeed a small matter. Most of them are first-level spiritual yellow rice, which is only used to satisfy hunger. If it is gone, it is gone. It is not worth worrying about it. There are only 17 mountains with second-level spiritual veins in the entire Qinyang sect that can grow rice above the second level. Bai Jiro's insect swarm never patronizes there. "Senior Sister Bai, may I ask how far you are from breaking the pill?" Li Chunfeng stopped her, and what he really wanted to ask was this. Bai Jiro raised her eyebrows, looked at her, and suddenly smiled, but did not answer. "Masterly, goodbye." With a touch of jade feet, the flying sword rushed. The next moment, the beautiful figure disappeared, leaving only Li Chunfeng with a sharp gaze staring into the distance. Golden pill. Golden pill. A realm that countless cultivators can hardly match even if they try their best and spend their entire lives. Everyone below the Jindan stage is an ant. The entire Qinyang sect only has a few Jindan ancestors. The reason why the Qinyang sect can be called a third-level sect in the Wuqi kingdom is because of these Jindan ancestors. Otherwise, what qualifications do they have to occupy this third-level spiritual vein? Other sects would have swallowed it up long ago. Bai Jiro, as one of the second-generation disciples under the ancestors who has the most hope of breaking through the Jindan stage, has a high status comparable to the elders of the immortal sect. Among the 112 immortal peaks of the Qinyang sect, only she and the main peaks Qinyang Peak, Xianxiao Peak, and the 4 of Changde Lingqi have supreme power, because they are the disciples who have the most hope of breaking through the Jindan stage. They are the real hope of the entire immortal sect. Otherwise, the entire Qinyang sect would not allow Bai Jiro to harvest the first-level spiritual field every 10 years. This huge resource has fallen into her hands alone. No one knows how many insects are in her treasure gourd and how powerful it is. Li Chunfeng secretly clenched his fist. Now, his strength is only at the 8th level of foundation building. In the eyes of others, it may be difficult to match, but only he knows that he is far from a lofty position. Whether he can enter the 9th level of foundation building is easy to say, but whether he can successfully break the pill and enter the realm of golden pill is as difficult as ascending to heaven. How many heroes of Qinyang sect failed to break through, and finally died in depression? Can Li Chunfeng break through the golden pill? The next moment, his eyes looked between Xian Peak and Huangyan Peak. Maybe. The answer is there. Chapter 47, The Prototype of the Spirit Pond, the Rainmaking Technique, a Small Success. You are listening at novelfull.audio. On the second day after the insect disaster, the entire Xian Peak was completely silent. As soon as it dawned, Chen Mo walked out of the wooden house and came to the spiritual field. The surroundings were bare, but the place where he stood now was still lush and full of life. The contrast is extremely sharp. The insect plague has passed, but Chen Mo dare not let down his guard at all. What is the scariest thing in this world? People's hearts. The other spirit planters have harvested nothing, but the spirit field where he is located still retains a lot. This sense of gap will become more and more intense as the sun rises and sets day by day. No one knows what these spiritual cultivators around will do. Therefore, all Chen Mo can do is to take care of this last piece of green space. With fingers clasped together, rain gathers in the sky. As the spiritual rain fell, a moist fragrance filled the air. The rain that originally fell for half an hour ended up lasting only as long as a stick of incense. Without even gaining experience in the rain distribution technique, the 2 acres of spiritual fields were saturated with water. At this time, Chen Mo was in trouble again. Now, with 228 experience points in rain spreading technique, there is still a long way to go before being upgraded to a minor level. It was originally planned that according to the progress of the 15 acres of spiritual land, it would take almost 2 months to break through to a small success, and by then the increase production, talent would be upgraded to another level, but now let alone Xiao Zhanghua's spiritual field, even his spiritual field only has 2 acres left, this alone is not enough to upgrade his talent. After thinking about it, I couldn't figure out the solution. Obviously, the future planning is going very smoothly, but God does not bring what one wishes, and accidents always happen inadvertently. Chen Mo sat cross-legged, still practicing the qi nourishing technique as usual. Suddenly, he had a flash of inspiration. Originally, we stopped raining because we were afraid that the spiritual rice would be drowned. But now that there is no spiritual rice left, what are we still afraid of? Chen Mo suddenly slapped his forehead. Nowadays, practicing this rain distribution technique can be done without any restrictions like practicing flame palm and gingjin finger. No matter how much rain he rains and no matter how much area he covers, there will be no objection from Ling Jifu. The seedlings are all gone, why do you care whether it rains or not? Chen Mo stood up and kneaded his fingers again. The sky is still covered with dark clouds, and the spiritual rain continues to water his 3 acres of spiritual land that has been abandoned. In this way, it lasted for 3 hours, until the spiritual energy in his body was exhausted, and then he stopped. The rainwater accumulated and the entire spiritual field was completely soaked. The excess rainwater gathered into a small river and flowed down the gully in the spiritual field. On this day, Xiao Zhanghua did not show up, and neither did Lan Ling. The neighbor He Jiping stopped and looked over from a distance. However, he didn't know what kind of medicine the other person was selling in the gourd. He kept wasting his spiritual energy and making rain. What was he doing? Chen Mo naturally wouldn't answer, because it lasted for 3 hours. His rain technique directly increased his experience by 9 points. At this rate, it will take at most 20 days for this spell to successfully break through. Of course, the improvement of spells will come at the cost of lagging in realm. After all, the time that was originally used to practice qi nourishing art was spent on making rain. For this reason, if you want to break through the 3rd level of qi refining, you have to postpone it for another 10 days and a half. After weighing the pros and cons, Chen Mo planned to practice the rainmaking technique to a small degree first. Delaying the realm is not a big problem. After all, the most pressing issue is the payment of food and rent. 5 acres of land weighs 600 kilograms, and a 50% increase in production is just right, but who can guarantee that there will be no major disasters in the future? It's better to be steady and prepared. In the next 20 days, Chen Mo guarded his 2 acres of spiritual land during the day, monitoring the movements of other spiritual planters at all times to prevent them from doing anything unethical. In addition, he dug a large pit about 10 meters in diameter and 7 or 8 meters deep in the land that was eroded by the mysterious seeds and no longer suitable for farming. After compacting the soil in the pit, Chen Mo repaired the ditch in the spiritual field so that excess rainwater could flow into the large pit. In 20 days, this artificial fish pond stored nearly half of its water. The rainwater that originally fell through the rain distribution technique contained some spiritual energy, but now it accumulated in the fish pond, and there was a hint of the prototype of a spiritual pond. Of course, at present, this so-called spiritual pond cannot be used to breed aquatic creatures. If a spiritual fish is put in it, it will suffocate and die in 2 days. However, the spiritual pool is just a byproduct. Chen Mo's real purpose is still to increase his rainmaking skills. These days, Xiao Zhanghua often goes out. He doesn't know where he is going, but the direction looks like Guchenfang City. Lan Ling locked herself in a cabin. He Jiping knocked on the door many times, but the door would not open. With the spiritual plant gone, He Jiping seemed to have no shame in mentioning the couple. In the entire 100 acres, it seemed that only Chen Mo was still busy. The spiritual rain was pouring down. When 2 bright yellow fonts appeared in front of Chen Mo, he stopped his power instantly, and the clouds and fog in the sky dispersed. Rain spreading technique +1. Rain spreading technique upgraded. He hurriedly opened the panel. Name, Chen Mo. Occupation, Ling Jifu, unlocked, Ling Yang officer, unlocked, lifespan, 31/77, cultivation, second level of Qi refining, exercise, nourishing Qi Ju, 135 out of 200, spiritual root, golden spiritual root, level 173/100, spell. Rain spreading technique, Shao Qing 1/800, air transfer technique, proficient 172/200, flame palm, minor 79/800, Genjin finger, great 1/1600, spirit snake body technique, proficient 184/200, talent, increase yield, purple, breeding, green, focus, increase yield, purple incorporate the spiritual energy of heaven and earth into the art of cloud and rain to increase the yield of spiritual plants. This talent can be integrated into the art of rain and other spells to increase the yield of spiritual fields by 100%, it has been integrated with the rain art. You can choose whether to integrate it when casting the spell. When this method is upgraded, the talent is also upgraded. 100%. Chen Mo's heart skipped a beat. The purple talent of increasing yield can actually increase the yield by 100%. Originally, he expected 80%, but he didn't expect that the yield would be doubled. In other words, he can harvest 400 kilograms of spiritual rice from 1 mu of spiritual field. 2 mu is 800 kilograms. Even if taxes and rents are excluded, he can still get 200 jin, which is equivalent to the harvest when he planted 3 mu of spiritual fields. If there is no insect plague, he can get a net income of 1,400 jin every day from just 5 mu of spiritual fields. In this way, he may be able to exchange for a low-grade spiritual stone every year. How about brushing the rainmaking technique to perfection first? However, as soon as this idea came up, it was immediately rejected by Chen Mo himself. It takes at least 3 months to brush the rainmaking technique to perfection. At that time, the spiritual rice will be mature, and it is almost impossible to increase the yield. What's more, if he delays these 3 months, then if he wants to break through the third level of Qi refining, he will have to postpone it for another 2 or 3 months. It's simply not worth the loss. The first level of Qi refining awakens the talent, increase yield. The second level of Qi refining awakens the talent, breeding. Then what talent will be awakened in the third level of Qi refining? Chapter 48. Where did you buy your seeds? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Autumn is crisp. The foot of Xian Peak, which should have been filled with fragrance, is now filled with the aroma of earth. Seeing that the day of harvesting grain was approaching, all the Lingzifu around Guchenfang City were as anxious as ants on a hot pot. Lan Ling came to Chen Mo's spiritual field more than once, but she tried her best and failed to get any spiritual rice from him. As for He Jiping, he was always watching eagerly from the side. If that flame palm hadn't frightened him, he would have snatched the gradually maturing rice ears in the 2 acres of spiritual fields in front of Chen Mo. However, Xiao Zhanghua, who was the strongest and most arrogant, lived in seclusion and practiced asceticism every day. He had never been to his spiritual field, nor had he spoken a word to him. Of course, there are some other spiritual planters not too far away. Occasionally they come to harass, but Chen Mo easily resolves them. After all, not everyone can easily take over the Genjin finger of Deshang realm. There are more and more ears of rice in the spiritual field. After the yield increases by 100%, the millet on each plant directly doubles. When it's just a 50% increase in production, it's not bad. Can't tell clearly. Now, after doubling the number, he finally caught the attention of other Ling Jifu. Did you notice that there seems to be something wrong with the Linghuang rice in that kid's field? The speaker was not Chen Mo's neighbor, but he was not too far away. This person's name is Miao Chen, and he is on the second level of Qi refining. He and He Jiping almost became spiritual husbands, and the relationship between the two is actually very close. This time, He Jiping wanted him to help out, but the result was predictable. If it weren't for the city's regulations that Lingji and his husband were not allowed to fight each other, he would have long ago become a dead soul under Gung Jin's finger. When you say that, something seems wrong. He Jiping frowned and looked in the direction of Chen Mo. He has been growing grains for so many years, but he has never seen Linghuang rice with such full ears. Miao Chen thought for a while and said, "Do you think the seeds he used are different?" That He Jiping also thought for a moment and nodded seriously. After thinking about it, they could only attribute the mutation of the rice ears to the difference in seeds. Otherwise, they could not explain the high yield of Chen Mo's spiritual rice. "Fellow Taoist is there any way you can find out?" That at this time, Miao Chen was in trouble. He wanted to ask where the seeds were purchased from, but it is unrealistic to think that I offended the other party not long ago and now I want something from you. He Jiping grimaced. He knew that he might not be as good as the other party, so he went there rashly, fearing that he would get another gingjing finger. "I'll try," but however, he was unwilling to give in. "There will be a big disaster this year, and there will be no harvest, but the taxes and rent for the spiritual field still have to be paid. Even if the outstanding debts cannot be paid this year, they will still have to be paid next year. In this way, I am afraid that I will not be able to lose a few kilograms of spiritual rice within 2 years. But once the yield of spiritual rice increases, everything will be revitalized. It might only take a year to make up for the loss, so the top priority was to find out from which grain station Chen Mo purchased his seeds." He Jiping thought for a long time, and there seemed to be only one way. Licking his face again, he came to Lan Ling's wooden house and knocked lightly on the door. A feeble sound came from the house. "Fellow Taoist Lan, friend Taoist Lan, it's me." When Lan Ling heard it was He Jiping, she suddenly lost interest. "I have a way to make up for this year's losses, and I came here to tell you." As soon as these words came out, Lan Ling, who was originally heartbroken, suddenly felt a glimmer of hope. She opened the door and saw He Jiping and Miao Chen standing at the door, asking, "What can I do?" "You come with us." But while talking, He Jiping was about to hold the other person's hand, but Lan Ling moved back and hid. When the other party refused, He Jiping chatted, but it was hard to force him, so he scratched his head and led the other party towards the spiritual field where Chen Mo was. "Going to find him? Do you think you are his opponent?" Lan Ling's tone was filled with disdain. She had begged the other party more than once, even willing to sell her body, but the other party remained indifferent. This made her love and hate Chen Mo. Yes and no. Lan Ling's location was not far from Chen Moban. At this moment, He Jiping stopped, pointed at the spiritual rice in front of him, and asked, "Take a look. The rice is fragrant and fruitful, although there are only 2 acres of spiritual land, it looks like a harvest. Do you think you will give it to us?" Lan Ling said sarcastically. No, take a closer look." He Jiping pointed to the rice ears in the field. "Are they carrying more millet than the Linghuang rice I have grown over the years?" Lan Ling frowned slightly, and after looking at it carefully, she finally realized the problem. "Really? Why is his output so high?" "Seeds, we infer that it's a seed problem." Miao Chen continued, "Fellow Taoist Lan, I wonder if you can ask where the other party's seeds were purchased from. Next year, we will also buy them. By then, the yield will increase. 2 years of taxes and rent can be paid in 1 year." Heartbeat. As soon as these words came out, Lan Ling was immediately excited. This may really be her only hope. But will the other party tell me? Her hot face had been pressed against Chen Mo's cold as so many times. Would the other party tell such a secret thing? Seeing that she was in a dilemma, Miao Chen spoke again, with Taoist friend Lan's appearance. "As long as he is willing to spend some money, can't he be defeated?" Lan Ling couldn't help but rolled her eyes. "Pretty. Original capital. Didn't she spend a lot of money? I don't know how many times I've taken off my clothes, but the other party didn't even look at me. Although this is the case, this is her only hope at the moment, so she must go." At least compared to the 2 people in front of her, Chen Mo didn't attack her, which means there is still a glimmer of hope. "I'll try." As Lan Ling moved, Chen Mo's heart suddenly became alert. The 3 people were whispering in the distance. Although he couldn't hear it, he knew that they were not discussing good things. The Linghuang rice in the field will be mature in a few days. At this time, he didn't want to cause trouble. Seeing Lan Ling getting closer and closer, Chen Mo dispersed his skills, put away the already dim and inferior spiritual stones, and stood up. "Chen, fellow Taoist Chen." Lan Ling still looked pitiful. Chen Mo said with a cold face, "What's the matter?" "I have an unwelcome request." "Don't ask if it's unwelcome." "Ah." Lan Ling was so embarrassed that she didn't know how to speak. After a long while, she realized that she had to get straight to the point at this time. She pointed at the spiritual rice in the field and asked, "Why is the yield of Chen Daoyu's spiritual rice so high?" Here it comes. It's exposed. The thing that Chen Mo was most worried about has finally happened. The spiritual field has increased production, and the spiritual rice has ears. If it was mixed in a spiritual field, it might not attract attention, but now there is nothing around, and he has only 2 acres of spiritual fields. It's hard for others not to notice it. Seeing Chen Mo frown slightly, Lan Ling continued to ask, "Chen Daoyu, can you tell me where you bought the seeds?" "Seeds? Why seeds?" Suddenly, Chen Mo suddenly realized. They actually thought that there was something wrong with the seeds, which led to a surge in production. In an instant, Chen Mo's hanging heart was relieved. The reason he had prepared was also swallowed back by him. Lan Ling sighed when she saw that he didn't speak. She knew that the other party couldn't say it. She turned to leave, and at this moment, Chen Mo's voice came from behind. 1, 2, 3 grain stations. Chapter 49. No grain tax this year. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 1, 2, 3 grain stations. Lan Ling turned around, her expression slightly hesitant. She seemed to have some impression of this grain store. The store was not big, and the purchase price was also very ordinary. It was an inconspicuous store in Guchenfang City. I didn't expect that there were high-quality seeds there. That's right, Chen Mo nodded, but he had already started to calculate how much kickback he should take. Thank you. This time, Lan Ling didn't get too entangled, but was thinking about what price to sell this information to He Jiping. She walked and thought, and when she was about to get in front of the other party, she secretly counted in her heart. How is it? Tell me. Lan Ling seemed very calm. Really? Miao Chen looked at her excitedly, and wanted to pounce on her. Of course, but I spent 3 taels of spiritual sand to buy the information from him. As soon as this was said, He Jiping frowned instantly. What does this mean? It couldn't be more obvious. You still want spiritual sand? Miao Chen was immediately deflated. For these spiritual plant husbands, they didn't want to give a penny. Give me 2 taels each, and I'll tell you about the grain shop. Chen Mo didn't know the deal between the 3 people, nor would he care about their conspiracy. These days, he still lived the life of an ascetic monk, except for farming and practicing. During this period, Mei Hua from the 123rd grain station also came to him. Of course, he also came with the instructions of the shopkeeper Song. He said that he invited Chen Mo to go to the market, and if possible, arrange for him to have a good chat at Song Yinshi's house. Seeing that the autumn harvest was approaching, Mei Hua's purpose of coming was very clear, just to remind him not to forget the agreement. Chen Mo refused. There are plenty of opportunities to drink wine, but not now. He was very sure that before the autumn harvest, as long as he left the spiritual field, the spiritual rice in the field would definitely be snatched by other spiritual plant husbands in less than an hour. At that time, it would be more than worth the loss. In the last few days, Chen Mo was even more energetic. Although the rules of Guchen Fangshi were in place, other spiritual plant farmers did not dare to blatantly snatch the spiritual rice from his field, but there was no guarantee that something would happen. He finally breathed a sigh of relief after putting 800 kilograms of spiritual rice into the wooden house. Chen Mo used grain bags to pack the spiritual rice into 500 kilograms and 300 kilograms. The next day was to wait for the grain collector to come. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, it has been more than half a month. Seeing the experience of Yang Qiju increase little by little, there are still 3 or 4 days left to break through the 200 mark, but the grain collector has not come yet. Until the Guchen Fangshi came to the owner of the shop, the problem that troubled the spiritual plant farmers was solved. This person did not come to collect grain, but brought a message. This year's insect plague, Ziyun Peak will no longer send grain collectors to come. This year's rent will be reduced, and next year's tax grain will be doubled. This news was like a sweet rain after a long drought. giving those spiritual plant husbands who were like fish trapped in a rut hope in the warmth of Zen Peak. Everyone praised the Peak Master for his wisdom and kindness. Some spiritual plant husbands even thought about whether to build a shrine for the Peak Master. However, considering that no one was willing to pay, the matter was left unresolved. The news brought by the market was exciting, but in the year of the disaster, most of the spiritual plant husbands had no harvest. The prosperity of the official road in the past was gone, and even the robbery repair had no business. Of course, this news was also a good thing for Chen Mo. Even if the grain tax doubled next year, he could still get about 1,000 kilograms, not to mention that the 800 kilograms of grain were not taxed, and the cultivation resources for the second year were also settled. Seeing that the breakthrough of the third level of qi refining was imminent, Chen Mo did not rush to the market, but continued to practice in the field as usual. He Jiping, Miao Chen, Lan Ling and other spiritual plant husbands set off for the market, preparing to exchange the remaining spiritual sand for some fasting pills. They would not be able to practice next year, but they still had to fast. Xiao Zhanghua also came to the market. However, he did not go there on his own initiative, but someone called him to the Niu family shop. The courtyard of the Niu family shop is very large. There is a long corridor in the north, which leads directly to the main room in the backyard. At this moment, Xiao Zhanghua was standing outside the door respectfully, quietly waiting for the call of the shopkeeper Niu. After a while, Niu Yud came out while putting on his clothes. Next to him was a beautiful female cultivator, who was much more beautiful than Lan Ling, who was also a spiritual plant husband. Greetings to the head of the Niu family. In the past, Xiao Zhanghua only dared to call the shopkeeper Niu. Since last year, he was considered to have been amnestied, so he changed his name to the head of the family, and when he saw that the other party did not object, he called him that. How much loss is this year? Niu Yud asked with a playful smile on his face. Talking about business, the female cultivator beside him retreated back to the house. No harvest. Xiao Zhanghua gritted his teeth, and the first thing that came to his mind was Chen Mo's figure. That lowly spiritual plant husband who was only at the second level of qi refining, but relied on the Gengjin finger, actually successfully protected 2 acres of spiritual fields. There are unexpected changes in the world. No one can predict that there will be insect disasters this year. Let's work harder next year. Niu Yud spoke to comfort him. Xiao Zhanghua is not stupid. He knows that the head of the family specially called him here. It is impossible that he is just to comfort him. So, he asked. What instructions does the head of the family have? Instructions? What instructions can there be? There are no instructions. Niu Yud's fake smile made Xiao Zhanghua's heart beat fast. Master, you. No instructions, don't you understand? Xiao Zhanghua thought quickly. Soon, he finally understood. I will remember the master's instructions and will never rob anyone this year. What did I say? Niu Yud immediately frowned. I didn't say anything. He waved his hand and continued, go back. Yes, Xiao Zhanghua didn't dare to be negligent or disobedient. He bent over and retreated quickly. Seeing him leave, the beautiful female cultivator who had just returned to the house came up again, and her jade hands kept rubbing Niu Yud's body. Did he really understand? He dared not disobey me. Niu Yud smiled and pinched the other's buttocks, and the female cultivator glared at him in pain. The entire Zen Peak has suffered a disaster this year. If there are more robbers at this time, not only will they not get any benefits, but they may also cause unnecessary troubles. Of course, this is from the perspective of the market. If it is from Xiao Zhanghua's perspective, he will definitely take action since he has not harvested any grain this year. And what Niu Yud did was to warn him not to act recklessly. He believed that even if Xiao Zhanghua had a few guts, he would not dare to go against his request. On the other side, Xiao Zhanghua listened, but he didn't listen completely. He really didn't dare to disobey Niu Yud's orders, so he didn't plan to rob other spiritual plant husbands, but there was one person, he would definitely kill him this winter. Chapter 50, Qi Refining Level 3, Accelerated Ripening, Spiritual Array Master. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Yang Qi Ju +1, Buzz. Between heaven and earth, the stars reversed, a large amount of spiritual energy poured into Chen Mo's body like a whale's breath, and kept flowing through his meridians. Finally, it gathered at Dantian and broke through the restraints. Chen Mo, who was sitting cross-legged, suddenly opened his eyes. He tore the spiritual energy in his hands and absorbed the last trace of spiritual energy in the spiritual sand. Then he spread his palms and watched the spiritual sand turn into gravel flow away from his fingertips. More than 10 days ago, the low-grade spiritual stone died, and all the spiritual energy contained in it was consumed, and these days, Chen Mo relied on the spiritual sand to practice again. For this reason, this day came a few days later. At this moment, he was breathing very smoothly, and he always felt that there was endless power in his body. The sense of control brought by the third level of qi refining made Chen Mo very obsessed. No wonder once he stepped into practice, he would always go further and further on the road of pursuing power, the third level of qi refining. Unlike the doubling of experience for spells, the experience required for realm improvement is much more gradual. The further experience only increased from 200 points to 300 points. At this rate, as long as there are enough low-grade spirit stones, he can break through again in a year and a half and become the fourth level of qi refining that even the spiritual plant husband dare not think of. Although the speed of cultivation without bottlenecks is not fast, it is stable. As long as he is given time, even the cultivators of Xian Peak and Qingyang sect, Chen Mo can catch up. Chen Mo slowly stood up, a golden light lit up at the tip of his finger, and the next moment, the spiritual field in front of him was instantly pierced. The power of Gingjin's finger increased significantly again. He slowly raised his hand, looked at his slender fingers, and shook his head with a wry smile. If I break through the third level of qi refining earlier, maybe I can keep another 400 kilograms of spiritual rice. There is no if in reality. Chen Mo was just sentimental, he would only look forward. As usual, he opened the panel, and before he saw the talent, a number instantly attracted his attention. Lifespan, 3180, lifespan. He originally only had 77 years, but now he can live to 80, breaking through the second level of qi refining gave him 1 year of life, and breaking through the third level of qi refining gave him 3 years. Does it mean that as long as you keep breaking through, your lifespan will continue to accumulate, and you can eventually get a glimpse of the realm of immortality? Chen Mo took a deep breath and was touched by his own thoughts. The illusory things in the legend became real at this moment. Practice and immortality, aren't they pursuing power and immortality? Practice hard, practice hard. Thinking away from the unexpected surprise, Chen Mo looked at the talent column. Talent, increased production, purple, breeding, green, ripening, green. Sure enough, the expected harvest came unexpectedly. With the improvement of the realm, he awakened another talent. Ripening, green, a method to change the world, a merit to reverse time, gather the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in one place, accelerate the growth of spiritual plants. This talent can be incorporated into the formation, and the time required for spiritual plant growth is shortened by 100%, unlocked by casting any first-level spiritual formation. Spirit formation. Chen Mo frowned slightly, originally thought that with the improvement of realm and the awakening of talent, he would have to learn a special spell to cast as a carrier of talent. But he never expected that this time it was not a spell at all, but a spiritual formation. As long as it is a first-level spiritual formation, the spiritual plants in it can be ripened. In terms of methods, it is naturally simpler than increasing production and breeding, which can only be used after practicing to be proficient, but in terms of growth space, it is far less. Whether it is increasing production or breeding, as long as there is enough time and resources, it is easy to upgrade them to purple, or even higher, but ripening is completely different. The first-level spiritual formation corresponds to the green talent. If nothing unexpected happens, then the second-level spiritual formation can unlock the blue talent, the third-level purple, and so on. The first-level spirit formation can be set up in the qi refining realm, but the second-level spirit formation requires the foundation building realm. The third-level spirit formation requires the strength of the golden core great power. Chen Mo did not expect that the upgrade conditions for the harvesting talent would be so harsh. However, even if it is only green, the spiritual yellow rice that originally took 9 months to mature now only takes about 4 months under the blessing of his formation, which greatly advances the time. If it is feasible, he can even achieve 2 harvests a year. Formation Formation, where should I go to learn formation? Chen Mo came back to his mind from his imagination of the future. The actual problem facing him now is how to become a spirit formation master. This is not like the rainmaking technique and the air crossing technique that are everywhere on the street and can be bought with just a little spiritual sand. Perhaps there are not many first-level spirit formation masters who can set up formations in the entire Guchenfang city. What's more, spirit formation masters are also like talisman masters, alchemists, and weapon refiners. They all belong to the same lineage. If ordinary people do not have the guidance of their masters, they are afraid that they will never be able to get involved. In other words, there is no place to learn even if you want to. Chen Mo thought of this and shook his head with a wry smile. He was given a powerful talent, but he was limited by his personal strength and could not use it. Spiritual plant husband, that is, spiritual plant husband, there are still too few resources that can be used. Suddenly, Chen Mo thought of someone. Maybe, I can ask shopkeeper Song. Chen Mo thought about it, and it really worked. He glanced at the sky. It was not yet noon, and it was still early. Instead of waiting until tomorrow, it would be better to set off for the market now. Maybe Song Yunshi could really introduce him to one or two spiritual array masters. Think and do. Chen Mo packed his clothes, loaded the neatly stacked spiritual rice in the wooden house with a cart, and then pushed the cart out, and just as he was on the road, a pair of eyes were cast at him. Xiao Zhanghua, who had been paying attention to this place these days, narrowed his eyes slightly and sneered in his heart. Finally, I can't help it. Xiao Zhanghua waited hard for many days, thinking that after the news from the market came, the prey would set off for the market. Unexpectedly, the other party was so patient that he waited for another 10 days to avoid being targeted by the robbers. Fortunately, he had enough patience. Chen Mo pushed the cart and headed towards the market. The weeds on both sides of the road had begun to wither and turn yellow, and the leaves of the trees in front were falling, just like a solemn autumn scene. Not long after walking, Chen Mo faintly felt a familiar breath. He stopped, turned around suddenly, and looked around, but he didn't see anyone. No. It feels right. Chen Mo was sure that he was being followed. He stood there and waited for a while, then pushed the cart again and continued to move forward. Xiao Zhanghua, who was following behind him, was worried, and his brows were furrowed into the shape of a Chuan character. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. With his strength, it is impossible for him to find me. Xiao Zhanghua thought about it, and there was only one possibility: coincidence. Thinking of this, he took another step and followed quietly.